The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists as I stood in my own backyard, water from my pool still dripping from my clothes. Sheriff Karen's voice cut through the summer air like a blade. "You are under arrest for trespassing and threatening a police officer." My neighbors watched from their windows as I was dragged away from the property I had worked 15 years to afford. The same pool where Karen had been charging them $20 a day while I was visiting my dying mother. That was the moment I realized the badge does not make you untouchable. It just makes your fall harder. I had everything I ever wanted in that little house on Maple Street. The white picket fence was not just a dream anymore. It was real. It was mine. And in the backyard sat the crown jewel of 15 years of double shifts and overtime hours. My pool. Every morning I would stand at my kitchen window with my coffee and watch the sun dance across that crystal blue water. I remembered the day the contractors finished it. I had cried right there on my back deck, not from sadness, but from pure joy. A factory worker like me was not supposed to have nice things like this. The neighbors loved it too. Sarah from next door would bring her kids over on hot afternoons. Old Mr. Peterson would sit in his lawn chair and tell stories while the children splashed and laughed. I never asked for money, never expected anything in return. That pool was my way of giving back to the community that had supported me through the dark years after my divorce. "You sure you trust us with the keys while you are gone?" Sarah had asked the night before I left for my trip. "Of course I do," I told her. "You have been like family to me." I was finally taking my first real vacation in years. My mother back in Ohio was getting weaker, and I wanted to spend 2 weeks with her while I still could. The timing felt perfect. Summer was ending, the pool season was winding down, and I had saved enough money to take the time off without worrying about bills. I packed my bags with excitement I had not felt in years. The house was secure. Sarah had the spare key for emergencies. My automatic pool cleaner would keep everything maintained. What could possibly go wrong? The drive to Ohio was peaceful. For the first time in decades, I was not thinking about work schedules or overtime or making ends meet. I was just a son going to visit his mother. The woman who had taught me that hard work and kindness were all you needed to build a good life. I spent those 2 weeks by her bedside, holding her hand and listening to her stories. She was proud of what I had accomplished. The house, the pool, the life I had built from nothing. "You always were my determined one," she whispered on my last day there. "Promise me you will never let anyone take away what you have earned." I promised her. I meant it with every fiber of my being. The rental car pulled into my driveway just as the sun was setting. I had decided to come home a day early to surprise Sarah and thank her for watching the house. The surprise was mine. There were cars in my driveway that I did not recognize. Voices and laughter were coming from my backyard. Children were screaming with joy in what sounded like my pool, but these were not voices I knew. I walked around the side of my house and stopped dead in my tracks. 3 families I had never seen before were using my pool like it was a public swimming area. Towels were scattered across my deck. Empty soda cans floated in the water. A man was grilling hamburgers on what looked like a portable grill right next to my patio furniture. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can I ask what you are doing here?" The man at the grill looked up with a confused expression. "We paid for the day pass, $20 per family. The sheriff said it was all set up with the owner." My blood turned to ice. The sheriff. "Yeah, Sheriff Karen. She has been running this thing for weeks now. Great deal, actually. Beats driving all the way to the public pool in the next town." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. I am the owner. This is my house, my pool." The families quickly gathered their things and left with embarrassed apologies. They had no idea they were part of someone else's crime. But I did, and the rage building in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt. I marched straight to Sarah's house and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile that quickly faded when she saw my face. "You are back early," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Sarah, who has been using my pool." She looked down at her feet. "I wanted to tell you, but she said not to bother you while you were with your sick mother." "She who?" "Sheriff Karen. She came by the day after you left, said you had given her permission to run a small community pool program. She had official paperwork and everything." I could barely breathe, and you believed her. "She is the sheriff. She showed me a document with what looked like your signature, and she said you would get a cut of the profits when you returned." Sarah's voice was shaking now. She said anyone who interfered would be arrested for obstruction of justice. The pieces were falling into place, and each one felt like a knife in my back. How much was she charging? $20 per family per day. She came by every evening to collect the money from the families who used it. I did the math in my head. For 2 weeks, that could easily be hundreds of dollars per day. Money that someone was pocketing while using my property, my utilities, my pool chemicals. Money made by terrorizing my neighbors with threats of arrest. "Sarah, did you ever see the paperwork? The document with my signature?" She shook her head. She said it would be in her official files at the station. But honestly, I was too afraid to ask too many questions. You know how she can be. I did know. Everyone in town knew. Sheriff Karen had a reputation for using her badge to get her way. But I had never imagined she would be bold enough to steal someone's property while they were away caring for a dying parent. That night I sat on my back deck, staring at my violated pool. The water looked the same, but everything felt different. This was not just theft. This was a violation of trust, of safety, of everything I had worked for. And it was just the beginning. I did not sleep that night. By sunrise, I was knocking on doors throughout the neighborhood. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Mrs. Henderson from down the street answered her door with nervous eyes. When I asked about the pool situation, she immediately looked around as if someone might be watching. "Please do not tell her I said anything," she whispered. "But that woman has been nothing but trouble since you left." "What happened?" "The first week, I saw all these strange cars and went to investigate. When I asked the families about it, they said they had paid the sheriff for pool access. I was confused, so I called the non-emergency line to ask about it." Mrs. Henderson's hands were shaking as she continued. "Karen showed up at my door that same evening in her squad car. She told me that questioning her authority could be considered interfering with police business. She said next time I might find myself under arrest." The pattern was becoming clear. Did she threaten anyone else? Old Mr. Peterson asked her about it too. She told him his property taxes might need to be reevaluated if he kept causing problems. And you know he is on a fixed income. I felt sick. Karen had used her badge to intimidate senior citizens and neighbors who were just trying to look out for my property. She had turned my street into a place where people were afraid to ask questions. I spent the morning documenting everything. I took photos of the pool area, the damage to my deck furniture, the empty cans and trash that had been left behind. But more importantly, I started writing down every detail of what my neighbors told me. Tom from across the street had seen Karen collecting money every evening around 6 o'clock. He had assumed it was legitimate because She was in uniform and driving a police vehicle. When he mentioned it to his wife, she had told him to mind his own business. Nobody wanted trouble with the sheriff. The Martinez family had actually tried to approach Corinne about using the pool for their daughter's birthday party. Corinne had quoted them $60 for a half-day rental and insisted on cash only. When they asked for a receipt, she told them the paperwork would be handled through the city office. But we never saw any paperwork, Mrs. Martinez told me. And when we called the city office, they had no record of any pool rental program. By noon, I had talked to 8 different neighbors. Every single one had a story about being intimidated, threatened, or confused by Corinne's behavior. She had systematically used her position to create fear and compliance while running an illegal business out of my backyard. The most disturbing revelation came from Sarah. When I pressed her for more details, she finally admitted that Corinne had made other threats. She said if anyone caused problems, she would find reasons to pull people over, traffic violations, property code infractions. She made it sound like she could make our lives miserable if we did not cooperate. That afternoon, I drove to the public library and used their computer to research Corinne's background. What I found was troubling but not surprising. In her 5 years as sheriff, there had been multiple complaints about abuse of power. Most had been dismissed or buried in bureaucratic processes. But this time was different. This time, she had committed crimes that could be documented and proven. She had stolen from me, extorted my neighbors, and used her badge to cover it all up. As I sat in my car outside the library, I made a decision. Corinne had picked the wrong person to victimize. I had spent my entire life following rules, respecting authority, and trusting the system. But the system had failed me and my neighbors. It was time to fight back. I waited until the next morning to confront Corinne directly. I wanted to give her a chance to explain herself, maybe even make things right. I was still naive enough to believe that confronting her with evidence might shame her into doing the right thing. I was wrong. I found Corinne at the local diner where she ate breakfast every morning. She was sitting in her usual booth, uniform crisp, badge gleaming in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. She looked up when I approached, and I saw something in her eyes that should have warned me. Not guilt, not embarrassment, just cold calculation. "Well, well, you are back early from your little vacation," she said without looking up from her coffee. "We need to talk about my pool." "What about it?" Her voice was steady, almost bored. "You have been charging people to use my property without my permission. That is theft, Corinne." She finally looked up at me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Prove it." Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. No denial, no explanation, just a challenge delivered with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. "I have witnesses," I told her. "You have neighbors who were confused about a community outreach program I was running with your permission," she replied smoothly. "Your neighbor Sarah will confirm that you gave me access to help families in need during the hot summer months." I stared at her in disbelief. "Sarah will tell the truth." "Sarah will tell whatever story keeps her family safe," Corinne said, standing up from the booth. "Just like everyone else on your street." The threat was clear, but I was too angry to be intimidated. "You cannot get away with this." "Get away with what exactly?" Corinne stepped closer, and I could smell her coffee breath. "Helping underprivileged families access recreational facilities. Sounds like community service to me." "You were collecting money. Donations, to cover maintenance costs. Very generous of you to allow it." Her smile widened. "Of course, I do not expect you to remember giving permission. You were very stressed about your mother's condition when we spoke on the phone. I had never spoken to her on the phone. We both knew it. But she was constructing a narrative in real time, and I was beginning to understand just how deep this went. "Where is the money?" I demanded. "What money? The donations went toward pool chemicals and cleaning supplies. I have receipts." She patted her pocket. "All properly documented." That was when I realized arguing with her was pointless. Corinne had planned this operation from the beginning. She had counted on my absence, my neighbor's fear, and her own position of authority to create a perfect crime. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. "I am going to report this to the state police," I told her. Corinne's expression darkened. "You are going to shut your mouth and be grateful I was looking after your property while you were gone, unless you want me to take a closer look at your tax records, or maybe inspect your property for code violations. I bet I could find all sorts of problems with that pool installation." I felt my hands clench into fists. "Are you threatening me?" "I am advising you, as a friend." She stepped even closer. "Walk away from this, forget it ever happened, or find out what happens when you try to fight someone with real power in this town." I should have walked away. I should have gone home and planned my next move carefully. Instead, I made the mistake of letting my anger show. "You are nothing but a corrupt thief hiding behind a badge." Corinne's hand moved to her radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at the diner on Main Street. I have a hostile individual making threats against a police officer." I could not believe what I was hearing. "You are calling for backup against me." "Sir, I need you to step back and calm down," Corinne said loudly, obviously performing for the other customers who were now staring at us. "I am not threatening anyone." "Sir, you need to leave immediately, or you will be placed under arrest." That was when I realized Corinne's game. She was not just stealing from me. She was setting me up to look like the aggressor, in front of witnesses, with backup on the way. I left the diner, but the damage was already done. Corinne had turned my confrontation into her victory, and I was beginning to understand that defeating her would require more than righteous anger. It would require strategy. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started planning like my life depended on it. Because it did. Corinne had shown me that she was willing to use every tool at her disposal to destroy anyone who challenged her. But she had also shown me something else. She was overconfident, and overconfident people make mistakes. The first thing I did was call my cousin Danny, who worked as a paralegal in the state capitol. I explained the situation carefully, leaving out nothing. "Jesus," Danny said when I finished. "She is running a protection racket out of your backyard." "What do I do?" "You document everything, and I mean everything. Dates, times, witnesses, financial records. Then you build a case so solid that even her friends in the local government cannot ignore it." Danny gave me a list of laws Corinne had potentially broken: theft of services, extortion, abuse of authority, intimidation of witnesses. Each crime carried serious penalties, but only if I could prove them beyond reasonable doubt. The next morning, I started my investigation in earnest. I bought a small recording device and began conducting formal interviews with my neighbors. I assured them that their identities would be protected and that I would handle any retaliation attempts. Mrs. Henderson was the first to agree to a recorded statement. Her voice shook as she described Corinne's threats, but she was determined to help. "I am 78 years old," she said into the recorder. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I should not have to be afraid of the police in my own home." Tom and his wife provided exact dates and times when they had seen Karen collecting money. The Martinez family had taken photos of Karen's squad car parked in my driveway during their daughter's birthday party visit. Most importantly, I convinced Sarah to tell the truth. It took 3 conversations and a promise that I would personally ensure her safety, but she finally agreed to describe Karen's intimidation tactics in detail. She said if I caused any problems, she would find reasons to have my husband pulled over, Sarah recorded. She said she could make our lives very difficult if we did not cooperate with her community program. I also started following Karen's routine. Every morning at 7, she would stop at the diner. Every evening at 6, she would patrol the neighborhoods. On weekends, she would spend hours at the police station doing what she claimed was paperwork. But the real breakthrough came when I talked to Jenny, the teenage daughter of one of the families who had used my pool. Jenny had been taking selfies by the pool and had accidentally captured Karen in the background of several photos. In one photo, Karen was clearly counting a stack of cash while standing next to her squad car. I can send these to you, Jenny offered. I have like 20 photos from that day. The photos were digital evidence that Karen could not explain away. They showed her in uniform, in my backyard, handling money from families who had paid for pool access. The timestamps proved she had been running this operation for at least 10 days straight. I also discovered that Karen had been sloppy with her cover story. When I called the city office and asked about pool rental programs, the clerk had no idea what I was talking about. When I mentioned that Sheriff Karen had told people the program was officially sanctioned, the clerk became very interested. The sheriff does not have authority to approve private property rentals, the clerk told me. If she told people that, she was misrepresenting city policy. By the end of the week, I had 12 witness statements, 47 photographs, documented lies about city policy, and evidence of systematic intimidation. But I also had something else. I had a plan. Karen thought she was untouchable because she controlled the local law enforcement, but there were higher authorities, state police, the district attorney's office, internal affairs divisions that investigated corrupt cops. I was going to bypass Karen's local power base entirely and take my evidence directly to people who could not be intimidated by a small-town sheriff with a badge and an attitude. The hunter was about to become the hunted. I had been planning my next move for 3 weeks when opportunity presented itself in the form of a regularly scheduled town council meeting. The agenda included a section for citizen comments, and I signed up to speak. Karen had no idea what was coming. I spent 2 days preparing my presentation. I organized the evidence into clear categories: financial crimes, abuse of authority, intimidation of witnesses, and misrepresentation of city policy. I made copies of everything and created a simple timeline that even the most corrupt official could not ignore. The night of the meeting, I arrived early and set up my materials in the front row. The town council chamber was usually empty except for a few regular attendees, but word had somehow spread. By 7 o'clock, the room was packed with neighbors, business owners, and people I had never seen before. Karen walked in just before the meeting started. She was in full uniform, badge polished, gun prominently displayed. She took a seat in the back row where she could watch everyone in the room. When she saw me in the front row with my stack of documents, her expression changed from casual confidence to something much more dangerous. Mayor Richards called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: zoning permits, budget discussions, road maintenance projects. I sat through 45 minutes of bureaucratic routine while my heart pounded in my chest. Finally, Richards announced the citizen comment period. Our first speaker tonight is... He looked down at his list. Well, I see we have quite a few people signed up. Let us start with our neighbor from Maple Street. I walked to the podium with my evidence folder and looked out at a room full of faces. Some were curious, some were supportive, and some belonged to people who clearly wished I would sit down and shut up. Good evening, I began. My name is on file with the city clerk, and I am here to report serious crimes committed by Sheriff Karen Thompson. The room went completely silent. Karen leaned forward in her chair, her hand instinctively moving toward her radio. 3 weeks ago, I returned from visiting my dying mother to discover that Sheriff Thompson had been operating an illegal business out of my backyard. She had been charging families $20 per day to use my pool while threatening my neighbors with arrest if they interfered. I opened my folder and began presenting the evidence methodically. Photos of Karen collecting money, witness statements describing her threats, documentation of her lies about city authorization. Mrs. Henderson, who is 78 years old, was told that questioning the sheriff's authority could result in her arrest. Mr. Peterson was threatened with property tax retaliation. The Martinez family was charged $60 for a birthday party at my pool. Mayor Richards was taking notes, but his expression suggested he was more interested in managing the political fallout than addressing the crimes. This is ridiculous. Karen stood up and called out from the back of the room. This man is obviously disturbed by his mother's illness and is making wild accusations against law enforcement. Sheriff Thompson, I continued, also told multiple witnesses that this program was officially sanctioned by the city. When I contacted the city clerk's office, they confirmed that no such program exists and that you have no authority to approve private property rentals. The room was buzzing now. People were whispering to each other, looking back and forth between me and Karen. That was when something beautiful happened. Mrs. Henderson stood up. Everything he is saying is true, she announced in a voice stronger than I had heard from her in weeks. That woman threatened me in my own home. Then Tom stood up. I saw her collecting money multiple times. Sarah stood up next. She told me if I caused problems, she would make sure my husband got pulled over. One by one, my neighbors found their courage. The same people who had been terrorized into silence were now standing up in a public forum and telling the truth. Karen's face went red. This is an organized attack on law enforcement. These people are obviously coordinating false statements. Actually, Mayor Richards interrupted, we need to take these allegations seriously. This is the kind of matter that requires investigation by outside authorities. That was when I played my final card. I have already contacted the State Police Internal Affairs Division. They are expecting my full report tomorrow morning. The color drained from Karen's face. Internal Affairs was outside her sphere of influence. They could not be intimidated or bought off. In addition, I continued, I will be filing formal complaints with the district attorney's office regarding theft, extortion, and abuse of authority. Karen stood up abruptly. This meeting has become a kangaroo court. I will not sit here and listen to these lies. Sheriff Thompson, Mayor Richards said firmly, I suggest you remain available for questioning by the appropriate authorities. Karen stormed out of the room, but the damage was done. The entire town had heard the evidence. My neighbors had found their voices, and the wheels of justice were finally turning. After the meeting, people came up to thank me for speaking out, but the thanks I remember most came from Mrs. Henderson. I have not felt safe in my own home for weeks, she told me. Tonight, For the first time, I feel like maybe that will change. It was going to change. Because corruption thrives in darkness, and I had just turned on all the lights. The state police internal affairs investigator called me the next morning. Detective Sarah Williams had a no-nonsense voice and asked precise questions about dates, amounts, and witness availability. "Based on what you have told me, we are looking at multiple felony charges," she said. "Theft of services, extortion under color of authority, and intimidation of witnesses. How quickly can you get your evidence to our office?" I drove to the state capitol that afternoon and spent 3 hours going through everything with Detective Williams and her partner. They photographed every document, copied every recording, and took detailed statements about Corinne's threats and intimidation tactics. "I have to ask," Detective Williams said as we finished up, "why did you wait 3 weeks to contact us?" "I wanted to make sure I had everything documented properly. I knew I would only get one chance to make this case." She smiled for the first time during our meeting. That was smart. Most people call us while they are still angry and emotional. They do not have half the evidence you brought us today. The investigation moved quickly after that. Within a week, Corinne was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal affairs review. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the allegations, and suddenly everyone in town had an opinion about Sheriff Corinne Thompson. Most of the opinions were not favorable. I started hearing stories from other people who had been intimidated or threatened by Corinne over the years. The owner of the auto shop on Main Street told me that Corinne had demanded free repairs on her personal vehicle in exchange for not finding any violations during a business inspection. The manager of the grocery store said Corinne had been taking items without paying and telling the cashiers to put it on the city account. There was no city account. A local contractor revealed that Corinne had forced him to provide free labor on her home by threatening to deny permits for his other projects. The pattern was clear. Corinne had been using her badge to steal, intimidate, and extort for years. My pool scheme was just the most recent example. 3 weeks after my town council presentation, Detective Williams called with an update. "We have enough evidence to file formal charges. Corinne Thompson will be arrested tomorrow morning on charges of theft, extortion, and abuse of authority. The district attorney wants to move quickly before she has a chance to destroy any additional evidence." The arrest happened at 7 in the morning, right in front of the diner where Corinne ate breakfast every day. I was not there to see it, but half the town was. The story made the evening news in 3 neighboring cities. Former Sheriff Corinne Thompson was arrested this morning on multiple felony charges related to an alleged scheme to illegally profit from private property while using her position to intimidate witnesses. The reporter interviewed several of my neighbors, including Mrs. Henderson, who looked directly into the camera and said, "She thought she could scare us into staying quiet. She was wrong." Within 2 months, Corinne pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full financial restitution and a promise never to work in law enforcement again. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. The money she stole from my pool operation was returned to me, along with damages for the cost of cleaning and repairs. But the real victory was not financial. The real victory was walking down my street and seeing my neighbors wave without fear in their eyes. It was Mrs. Henderson working in her garden without looking over her shoulder. It was knowing that a corrupt official had been held accountable for her crimes. Corinne had thought her badge made her untouchable. Instead, it made her fall that much more satisfying to watch. 6 months after Corinne's arrest, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sunset reflect off my pool water. The same pool that had been the center of so much violation and anger was now peaceful again. But I was not the same person who had left for Ohio to visit his dying mother. I had learned things about power, justice, and community that I wished I had never needed to learn. The most important lesson was that corruption relies on silence. Karen had been stealing and intimidating for years because people were afraid to speak up. Fear of retaliation, fear of not being believed, fear of fighting someone with a badge and official authority. But fear only works when people face it alone. When Mrs. Henderson stood up in that town council meeting, she gave permission for everyone else to find their courage. When Tom confirmed what he had witnessed, he made it impossible for Karen to dismiss the allegations as the ravings of one angry homeowner. When Sarah finally told the truth about the threats she had received, she broke the spell of intimidation that had kept everyone silent. The new sheriff, elected in a special election 3 months after Karen's arrest, stopped by my house to introduce himself. Sheriff Martinez was younger than Karen, with a military background and a genuine smile. "I want you to know that things are going to be different," he told me. "I have heard about what happened to you and your neighbors. That kind of abuse of authority will not be tolerated under my watch." I believed him, but more importantly, I was no longer willing to just trust and hope for the best. I had started attending town council meetings regularly. I had organized a neighborhood watch program that included monitoring local government as well as crime prevention. I had even started volunteering with a state organization that helps people report police misconduct. My mother passed away 2 months after Corinne's arrest. I was holding her hand when it happened, and her last words were about how proud she was that I had stood up to corruption. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You did not let anyone take away what you earned." But the truth was more complicated than that. Corinne had taken something from me that I could never get back. She had stolen my peace of mind, my trust in authority, and my naive belief that good people could just live quietly and expect to be left alone. What I got in return was something I had never expected to need: knowledge, experience, the understanding that justice is not something that just happens. It is something that must be fought for, documented, and demanded by ordinary people who refuse to be intimidated. My pool is beautiful again. Children splash and laugh just like they used to. Neighbors gather for barbecues without looking over their shoulders. The community that Corinne tried to terrorize with her badge is stronger now than it was before she tried to destroy it. But the best part of the whole experience happened last week. A young woman from the next town over called me after reading about the case in the newspaper. She was dealing with a corrupt city inspector who was demanding bribes to approve legitimate building permits. "I heard you stood up to a corrupt official," she said. "Can you help me figure out how to document what is happening to me?" I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, sharing everything I had learned about building cases, collecting evidence, and finding the courage to fight back against corruption. Because that is what we do now. We do not just hope someone else will fix the problem. We do not just trust that authority figures will do the right thing. We stand up, we document, we support each other. And we make sure that people like Corinne Thompson learn that badges do not grant immunity from consequences. They just make the fall harder.